electable. So that's not a coalition of support that he's going to really depend on, because they're much more Biden supporters. They're much more worried about kind of defeating Trump. They're the type of guys who I think are going to be like 45 in the White House. We need to get them out. They're much more likely to kind of be watching MSNBC and consuming kind of more traditional media like the New York Times. They're never people who are just, again, historically less friendly to Bernie. And we'll get into the kind of the war on Bernie throughout the media in a bit. But it's not really that much of a surprise here. This weakness in Biden's strength with these same voters are obvious reasons to doubt Bernie as the case for the unifier, or Bernie as the eventual nominee, especially since Sanders has thus far ignored my advice, I know the nerve, that he reassures skeptics by telling them that he has a record as a deal maker. He can moderate on certain issues so they can feel safe supporting him even if they aren't ready for the revolution. But still, if you're a wavering Democrat concerned about both party unity and ultimate electability, about exciting all the diverse factions of your base while competing for the disaffected, both the relative breadth of Bernie's primary coalition and his decent polling among non-voters and Obama-Trump voters are reasons to give him another look. I think that's a great way of putting it. Like, that is a great way of putting it. Like, making the case, I think it's really powerful, and actually really, I'm incredibly happy to see someone like Ross Douthat making the case for, Bernie is electable in the pages of the New York Times. Like, people are going to see this who I think will have heard, I think, multiple times that Bernie Sanders is just completely unelectable. You can't go near him with a 10-foot pole if you want to win the election. Like, that is incredibly, incredibly important. I think, he goes on to continue, the decent polling, I suspect, reflects a sense among voters drawn to populism that Bernie is different from not only the more centrist candidates, latecomers Michael Bloomberg and Deval Patrick, but Buttigieg as well, but also from his fellow far-left winger, Warren, who has fully embraced the cultural war breadth of the new progressivism, while Sanders remains fundamentally an economic policy monomaniac. I mean, I guess I wouldn't say that too entirely. I mean, he's still a social liberal, of course, and he isn't in the culturally conservative economic populist quadrant where so many unrepresented voters reside. I think that's kind of much more where kind of Tulsi is on that front. But for the kind of American who's mostly with the Democrats on economics, but wary of progressivism's zest for culture war, Sanders' socialism might be strangely reassuring as a signal of what he actually cares about, and battles he might eschew for the sake of anti-plutocratic goals. At least he's no more radical on an issue like abortion than a studied moderate like Mayor Pete. This is why, despite technically preferring a moderate like Biden or Klobuchar, I keep coming back to the conservatives' case for Bernie, which rests on the perhaps wrong but still attractive supposition that he's the liberal most likely to spend all his time trying to tax the rich and leave cultural conservatives alone. So that's interesting. Yeah, I think that's probably the most likely case there. You see, you got a little bit of The Sopranos there, but he's most likely to leave cultural conservatives alone. Yeah, that's definitely a very interesting case for Bernie Sanders. It's an interesting electability argument, so credit to Mr. Ross for that. Hey guys, just a reminder that we want to hear your voice. If you like the show, please remember to leave a 5-star review on iTunes, or let us know that you like it by commenting on Spreaker.com or any Spreaker platform, or commenting or leaving a review on whatever platform you may want to get your podcast on. If you like the show, please, again, remember to subscribe, leave a review, because that's how you can support us. Also, if you like the show, please support us by going to Spreaker.com/TSWS, scrolling down and accessing our brand new merchandise store. Yeah, check that out. It's pretty cool. You're going to want to see it. There's been a very interesting new kind of compilation here of instances, shall we say, in the media where Bernie Sanders, as we kind of do our little 1-2 punch here on Bernie Sanders stories, like Bernie Sanders has not been receiving the most favorable, the most friendly of treatment, at least as far as the mainstream media is concerned. So this definitely was a very interesting little compilation here, put together again in Jacobin. And I mean, as we know, Bernie Sanders supporters haven't always been really used to receiving the best treatment, as at least opposed to their kind of counterparts, supporters of maybe Pete Buttigieg or I don't know, any establishment type candidate. There's been plenty of other interesting examples here. Many have really also grown used to hearing this impression question characterized as a product of a self-imposed victim complex, or maybe even a figment of their imagination. Like, oh, the media treats you fine. It's no problem. You're just being a little grumpy. So stop being so grumpy. Oh my gosh. Yeah. So there has never been any dearth of anecdotal evidence of the media's systematic bias against Sanders. When MSNBC's legal analyst Mimi Rocha declared that Sanders, quote, makes my skin crawl, though I can't even identify what exactly it is. That was a pretty memorable moment, pretty memorable clip that we could, we could probably play that for you on the pod here. And she kind of inadvertently summed up the sentiment of the generalized was really deep contempt that also kind of characterizes the way Sanders and his campaign are discussed on the airwaves and in marquee newspaper. Like, it just hasn't been very friendly, just to say the least. And that was really kind of the first bit of it, the real wake-up call, I think, for a lot of Sanders supporters that kind of showed her to be this type of person. Just in general.
About the campaign tonight. I'm asking.
There goes the microphone there. But pretty much it was this kind of
campaign.
Me as you
know, there. This is the clip here that's in question.
Me, as you know, again, I'm not the political analyst here, but just as a woman, probably considered a somewhat moderate Democrat, Bernie Sanders makes my skin crawl.
All right. Well, that was former Assistant U.S. Attorney Mimi Rocha, who...
that's pretty much a little clip there from the Young Turks, and it just kind of shows you that is a lot of what we see kind of coming from Bernie Sanders here. Like, that's a big part of it. And that fun little tidbit is, I think, kind of largely indicative of a lot of what we see here from people who support Bernie Sanders and people who are just so opposed to Bernie Sanders, kind of the way that we talked about in the past segment when it comes to people like who are really well invested in kind of making the anti-electability argument that he's just not electable, he can't appeal to a broad base of support, like that whole situation there. So that was kind of the wake-up call to be like, oh, yeah, guys, they really don't like her. I mean, they try to keep it in. I think they're probably going to try to keep it in until I think things start to get really serious. But it's going to be a really big, I think, component of the campaign to come. So, though there are too many cases to list, examples abound of selective reporting of polls, cartoonish torquing of infographics, and erasure of facts or figures favorable to Sanders, and outright lying at the supposedly liberal leading MSNBC in particular. So let's take a look at some of these examples here. Here's one. That was talking about 49 and 48. 49 is obviously less than 48. When Sanders going here from second to fourth place. MSNBC made a handy graphic for a poll on July 7th that showed the 2020 matchups against Trump among Democratic voters. That was pretty much put Bernie Sanders in fourth place. So just for no reason. Like, Joe Biden was beating him 53 to 43. Kamala Harris was beating Trump 48 to 46. Elizabeth Warren was tying him at 48%. And then, we got Bernie Sanders at 49 to 48, getting more of the vote than anybody else except for Biden, but still ending up in fourth place somehow. And, of course, 5 is less than 7. In another example, Steve Kornacki placed Sanders' name below Warren's on July 15th when he was reporting on a poll out by the Washington Post and NBC, which is obviously MSNBC's parent company. Once again, the order of names is descending by poll numbers, except for Bernie Sanders, who just somewhere is somehow third place when he's 1%. As you can see if you're watching on the YouTube video of this, as you can see, he is third place, even though the winner of the poll, opposed to President Trump, again, this is the kind of same deal here, is Joe Biden with 51% of the vote against Trump, and Bernie Sanders has 50. Sanders also, it was misleading to have Sanders' name after Warren's in the graphic, but it was an absolute lie to say that Warren was second. Kornacki, who was talking about a poll conducted by his own company, did say that. He does say it in this video, quote, Elizabeth Warren, she's been running second place. She's been running second place on the Democratic side. She leads Trump by 5 points. And the Kornacki shows the person who's actually in second place and says, Bernie Sanders, he leads by 7 points. So, just makes no sense. It's so frustrating. It just makes no sense. So Chuck Todd showed a graphic claiming that Sanders has gone down 5 points in a Quinnipiac poll. Todd got the absolute value right, but he did get the value sign wrong. Sanders didn't go down by 5 in the poll. He went up by 5, which is, again, it's a 10-point difference. So, yeah, that's kind of the wacky thing about it. If you look at the actual poll, they just completely misreported the entire poll. Sanders was up by 5 from 11 to 16 if you look at the actual numbers of the poll. So, somehow, after an April Monmouth poll showed Sanders polling at 27% among non-white voters and Biden polling at 25%. Velshi and Rule showed a graphic which somehow added 3 points to Biden numbers, putting him in first place. So the reality of the poll had him at 25. It's like, what? Rachel Maddow on April 29th did a segment and tweeted about a study of the gender of campaign donors. Unfortunately, she forgot to say the study. She said it looked at donors who gave $200 or more. After praising Gillibrand for doing the best in terms of targeting female donors, Maddow urged reviewers to look at the other end of the spectrum. It just strikes me as unsustainable. Bernie Sanders and Pete Buttigieg, look at them. Both of them are raising twice as much money from male donors as they are from female donors. 66 and 67% of your donations are from dudes. Dude! Yeah, wow. Okay. The same Open Secrets report Maddow citing explained the results were skewed. Sanders had the highest amount of money coming from small donors at 74%, and generally only donations above 200% are itemized. The gender landscape of small donors are absent. So we don't know what the genders from small donors are. And Sanders obviously, he pulls well with women voters, very, very well, in fact. I mean, among the best in the field, actually. But still, that won't stop someone like Rachel Maddow from coming out there and saying that. Like, what is wrong? I mean, come on. Sanders goes here in March. Alex Witt hosted a panel to discuss Bernie Sanders' March 2nd campaign kickoff speech. Panelist at MSNBC, political analyst Zerlina Maxwell apparently clocked it. I remember this. I remember hearing about this on Twitter. He did not mention race or gender until 23 minutes into the speech. Apparently, he definitely mentioned race and gender, as we figured out 5 minutes into his speech, when he said the underlying principles of our government will not be racism, sexism, xenophobia, homophobia, and religious bigotry. So that's pretty much the whole idea. He starts his speech 31 seconds after he gets on stage. So to be charitable to his critics, he didn't mention gender or race until 5 minutes and 31 seconds. So it's kind of the, be absolutely fair, but whatever. So that is whatever. It's just it just builds up. It really builds up, and it shows you. I think broadly, it makes you kind of worry more and more about. It really makes you worry more and more about what reaction and what thumb will be put on the scale if Bernie Sanders does get closer and closer to winning the Democratic nomination. Like, what special items will be. What moves will be made to make sure that Bernie Sanders stays away from increased political contention here if he does really get closer and closer to the top. Like, what is going to happen here? Yeah, the New York Times reporter assigned to cover his campaign consistently paints a negative. This is, again, more examples here for you. This one's from Katie Halper.